Winters in northern Montana can be brutal. Freezing winds, whiteout blizzards, the kind of silence that settles deep in your bones. But I've always loved it. Until last winter. That was when I learned that not everything in the snow is dead. Some things watch. Some things wait. And if you ever see lights drifting through the trees on a winter night, don't follow them. It was early January, and I had just arrived at my Uncle Hank's cabin, deep in the mountains. The place was remote, 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by endless pines and frozen lakes. It was my escape, a place to unplug, to fish, to sit by the fire with nothing but the wind outside. But that night, there was something else out there, something that wanted me to see it. The first sign that something was wrong came just after sunset. I had finished stacking firewood and was warming up by the fire, sipping whiskey, when I heard it. A single knock. Not on the cabin door. On the window. I froze. The windows were covered in frost, thick with ice from the brutal cold. The outside world was barely visible through the fogged-up glass. I turned my head slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The knock didn't come again, just silence. But I felt something watching me. A pressure in the room, like the air had gotten heavier. I told myself it was nothing. The wind, the house settling. Then, another knock. This time, from the back window. My stomach tightened. I stood up, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The back window faced the woods, where the trees stretched for miles with no signs of civilization. I told myself not to look, but my body moved on its own. I stepped toward the window, and then I saw the lights. They flickered between the trees, glowing orbs of pale blue, floating just beyond the tree line. At first, I thought they were headlights, maybe from a snowmobile or a lost hiker. But they moved wrong. They weren't coming from the road. They were weaving through the trees, drifting too smoothly, like they weren't touching the ground, like they were alive. I should have shut the door. I should have walked away. But instead, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. That was my first mistake. The cold hit me instantly, biting through my layers. My boots crunched against the snow as I took a few slow steps onto the porch. The lights were closer now, flickering like distant lanterns, pulsing like they were calling me. I took a step forward, then another. Then, from the trees, I saw someone watching me. A figure stood just past the lights, half hidden in the darkness. Tall, still. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was listening. My pulse hammered against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out. My voice felt too small in the freezing air. The figure twitched. Then, in a voice that sounded too close, it whispered, "Follow." I staggered back, my breath coming in short gasps. My body screamed at me to run, to get inside, to lock the door and never look back. But something held me there. The lights pulsed again. The figure shifted, stepping closer. And then I saw its face. It looked like me. Not a perfect copy, but close. The same jawline, same nose, same shortcut hair. But something was off. The eyes were too dark, the lips too stiff, like a wax figure trying to imitate life. It opened its mouth. And then, in my own voice, it whispered, "Come inside." I bolted. I ran so fast I nearly slipped, throwing myself against the cabin door and slamming it shut behind me. I fumbled for the lock with numb fingers, my breath ragged. Then, the knocking started again, but this time, it was coming from every window. Not just one, all of them. I grabbed my rifle from the mantel, backing into the corner of the room. I couldn't see anything through the windows, just the swirling snow, the frost-covered glass. But the knocking, it didn't stop. Slow, rhythmic taps, as if something was testing the glass. Like they were waiting for me to answer. I don't remember how long I stood there. An hour? 2? The fire had burned low, the room growing colder by the second. Then, all at once, the knocking stopped. I waited, listening. The wind had died down. The forest was silent. I forced myself to step toward the window, my knees weak. I wiped away a patch of frost with my sleeve, and someone was standing on the other side of the glass. I fell backward, my pulse screaming in my ears. The thing outside didn't move. It was still, just staring at me. And I realized, it wasn't looking at me. It was mimicking me. It was standing the same way I was, head tilted the same way, hands positioned just like mine, like a reflection, except for the eyes. Because the eyes were wrong. Too big, too dark, too hungry. I don't remember getting to my truck. I don't remember starting the engine, but somehow I did. Somehow, I peeled out of that cabin driveway, tires kicking up snow as I sped toward town. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there, standing at the edge of the woods, were the lights, watching, flickering, waiting. I don't go to that cabin anymore. I don't know what I saw that night, or why it looked like me, but sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I catch something in the trees. A soft blue glow, a figure standing too still, and when I turn my head, there's nothing there, just my own reflection in the glass, smiling. Growing up, I spent every winter at my family's remote cabin in Montana, a tradition passed down for generations. It was nestled deep in the mountains, surrounded by miles of untouched snow and towering pines. It was the perfect getaway. No tourists, no noise, just the crackling fireplace, the chill of the wind against the windows, and the quiet, endless snow. But last winter, that silence was broken, because something else was out there, and it wanted to come inside. The storm started earlier than expected, a brutal whiteout that rolled in fast, swallowing the mountains in a wall of snow. By the time night fell, the wind was howling, rattling the old wooden walls of the cabin. My parents had stayed behind in town, planning to drive up the next day, so for the first night, I was alone. That was fine, or at least it should have been. I had just finished stacking firewood when I heard it. A knock. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was there. A slow, deliberate knock on the front door. I froze. No one else was supposed to be here. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but then, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, louder. I swallowed hard, stepping toward the door. Hello? I called, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer, but I swear I heard breathing. I hesitated, then did something I regret. I opened the door. The blizzard roared against my face, snow whipping inside, but there was no one there. The porch was empty, no footprints, just an endless stretch of untouched snow. I shut the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Maybe it was a tree branch. Maybe the wind had shifted something outside. But as I turned back toward the fireplace, my stomach dropped. The back door, the one that led into the woods, was wide open. I didn't remember unlocking it. I didn't remember even going near it. A gust of freezing air swept inside, sending a shiver down my spine. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a rusted fire poker, and stepped forward, heart hammering. Then, from somewhere inside the cabin, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the second floor. I gripped the fire poker so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't alone. Something had gotten in, and it was still here. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the staircase. The steps creaked under my weight. The second floor was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the fireplace downstairs. I reached the hallway, and then I saw it. The guest bedroom door was open. I knew, for a fact, that I had closed it. The dim light from the hallway barely reached inside, but in the shadows, I could just make out the outline of someone standing in the corner. Tall, still, facing the wall. I felt my entire body go cold. Then, it moved. A slow, jerky motion, its head tilting toward me. I took a step back. The thing in the room mimicked me. I turned. So did it. I ran. I flew down the stairs, nearly slipping as I sprinted toward the front door. Behind me, I heard it, running, heavy, uneven footsteps, pounding against the wooden floor. I reached the door, yanking it open. The wind screamed, snow blinding me as I threw myself outside. But just before I crossed the threshold, a hand grabbed my wrist. It was ice cold, bony, wrong. I ripped free, tumbling into the snow. When I scrambled up, gasping, I saw it, standing in the doorway. It wasn't a person. Not really. It was wearing my face. I don't remember getting to my truck. I don't remember driving. But somehow, I made it back to town, slamming on the brakes outside my parents' house. I barely managed to tell them what happened. They called the police, and when they arrived at the cabin, the doors were all locked. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, like nothing had ever been there at all. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know one thing for certain. Something else was up there in that cabin. Something that looked like me. And in the dead of winter, when the wind howls against my window, I still hear it knocking. I've driven through blizzards before. I know the dangers, black ice, whiteouts, the cold creeping into your bones. But none of that prepared me for what happened last December. Because there's something worse than getting lost in a storm. It's realizing that the road you were on never existed. I was headed to my parents' house in northern Wyoming, a 6-hour drive through winding mountain roads and open stretches of frozen farmland. The storm had been bad all day, but I wasn't worried. My truck had good tires, a full tank, and an emergency kit. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Then, somewhere past Red Hollow Pass, I saw the detour sign. That was my first mistake. It came out of nowhere, barely visible through the snow. A wooden sign, old and splintered, pointing down an unmarked road. Detour. My GPS had no record of it. But the highway ahead was completely buried in snow, and turning around meant losing at least 2 hours. I hesitated. Then I took the detour. The road was narrow, cutting through thick woods. The snow came down harder, swallowing the trees, turning everything into a blur of white. I kept driving, watching the road vanish beneath my tires. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Then my headlights caught something ahead. A car, half buried in the snow, hazard lights blinking. I slowed down, and that's when I saw her. A woman stood beside the car, waving one arm, the other clutching her coat tightly around her. She looked cold, desperate. I pulled up beside her and rolled down the window. "You okay?" I called over the wind. She nodded, her breath fogging in the air. "My car died," she stammered. "I don't have a signal. Can you give me a ride to the next town?" Something about her felt off. Maybe it was the way she stood, rigid, too still. Or the way the snow around her looked untouched, like she hadn't been moving at all. But I wasn't about to leave her out here in the cold. I unlocked the passenger door. "Hop in," I said. She hesitated. Then she did something that sent a chill through my entire body. She looked past me. Not at me. Not at the dashboard. At something behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, empty road stretching behind us. When I looked back at her, she was already inside the truck. And she was smiling. I pulled back onto the road, glancing at her from the corner of my eye. Her coat was too thin for this kind of weather. Her skin was pale, almost gray, like she hadn't been warm in a long, long time. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice too quiet, she said, "You're going the wrong way." My stomach twisted. I forced a chuckle. "What do you mean?" She turned her head slowly, staring directly into my eyes. "There is no road here." The hair on my arms stood up. I flicked my eyes to the rearview mirror. The road behind us was gone. No tire tracks. No snowbanks. Just an endless stretch of flat white nothing. My grip tightened on the wheel. I pressed the gas harder. "We'll hit town soon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head. "There is no town." My breath hitched. I pulled out my phone, checking the GPS. No service. But worse than that, the map was blank. Not just the detour. Everything. Like the whole world had been erased. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, tires sliding across the ice before coming to a stop. I turned to face her, and my blood ran cold. She wasn't in the passenger seat anymore. She was outside the truck, standing in the snow, staring at me through the windshield. Her mouth opened, but her voice didn't come from her lips. It came from inside the truck. "You should have never taken the detour." Something moved in the back seat. I didn't think. I didn't look. I just hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, the wheels barely finding traction. I didn't care. I just kept driving, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Snow whipped around me, turning the world into a swirling void of white. Then, Just when I thought I'd be lost forever, I saw headlights. The road reappeared so suddenly I almost swerved off it. My GPS blinked back to life, showing my original route. No detour, no side roads. Just the highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. When I finally reached my parents' house, I was shaking. I told them what happened. They didn't believe me. "There's no side road out there," my dad said. "No turnoff, no detour. Asterisk asterisk." I pulled up my GPS history. Nothing. Like the whole road had never existed. I don't know where I went that night. I don't know what that woman was, or what would have happened if I had stayed on that road. But sometimes, when I drive through a snowstorm, I see a figure in the distance, standing in the snow, waving, waiting for me to take the wrong turn. Again,